Hello viewers, thank you for joining me, and welcome to my review of Hyouka, the first ever series on this channel that was voted in by poll, and I hope you don't mind, but I want to take a minute to talk about that. There isn't a poll this month, because I'd already decided on an anime for January, but I'd say most reviews going forward will be decided this way. I know not everyone will be interested in every series, so the real information to take away from this is that I'll be leaving polls active for the first 3 days of each month. So even if you don't watch the review for that month, remember to check out my community tab so you can have a say in what I watch next, and don't worry if your series doesn't win. Anything that goes up for a vote is something I plan to see sooner or later. On that note, Hyouka is a show that I didn't actually know a lot about, past the basic premise of the plot, but which has always had this really good vibe to me. Like, I know I've heard people talk about it since it came out, and while I didn't remember the details of what they said, I knew every review I'd seen had been positive. That lack of detail may be because this is yet another slice-of-life show where we'll mostly be talking about the big picture points, rather than the specific plots of each little mystery arc. So I won't promise this will be completely free of spoilers, but I'll warn you before we get into them. Hyouka introduces us to Hotaro Oreki, who considers himself an energy conservationist. Some might just call him lazy, but he tends to put quite a lot of thought into how to go about his days expending the least amount of effort possible. He's just started high school, and he's definitely not the type to get involved normally. But Hotaro has a much more motivated older sister, who can be a little intimidating. She's backpacking around the world when the story starts, but they correspond regularly through letters. Soon after he starts school, he receives one saying she's heard her old club, the Classic Literature Club, is in danger of being shut down for having no members, so she leaves him with a friendly push to sign up and keep it alive, and a veiled threat of what'll happen to him if she returns home and discovers he hasn't. Hotaro's not too upset about this, though. If he's the only club member, it gives him free rein to do anything he wants during club hours. Is his mindset right up until he reaches the club room on the first day and discovers someone else is already inside. This was my perception of Hyouka before I started it. Lazy Boy is badgered into a friendship with an excitable girl who then drags him around solving mysteries that pop up within the school. And that's almost accurate, but Eru Chitanda wasn't quite what I was expecting. The Chitanda family is one of the most prestigious families in town, so the term well-bred comes to mind. I was expecting someone a lot more high energy, but Eru is generally very sweet and polite and a little reserved. She does love a mystery, though. Hotaro spends a lot of the early episodes trying to distract her because he quickly learns that by the time she's formally declared she's curious about something, the battle's already lost. These early mysteries bring 2 more people into the club, though both have to juggle this commitment with responsibilities to other clubs they were already involved in. One is Satoshi, Hotaro's best friend. Right off the bat, Satoshi comes across as one of those characters who's just really easy to like. He provides all the energy I was expecting from Eru and then some. Initially, he and Hotaro seem like a bit of an odd pair, but the more time you spend with Satoshi, the clearer it becomes that there's something troubled lurking under that easygoing attitude. And lastly, there's Mayaka, an old middle school acquaintance of the 2 boys. I'm not sure I'd call them friends at the start, but there's a familiarity there. She has a crush on Satoshi that she's not that shy about acknowledging, but also not that pushy about, which I found refreshing. And she's got sort of a rivalry with Hotaro. He doesn't care about competing with her, of course, but she's often exasperated whenever he bests her at solving the mysteries. But it's a good kind of one-sided rivalry. She uses it to try and better herself, and she fits into this friend group just fine. Hyouka is a show that feels like it really walks to the beat of its own drum, and I love that about it. Nearly every aspect of this series defied my expectations in some way, and that was consistently a good thing. It'll come up when we get into the characters too, but the first example that comes to mind is just how the series was made. Nisekoi ended up disappointing me, but I know I said in that review how I'd been excited to see an unusual episode count, That sort of thing just gives me the impression that someone behind the scenes really cared, was willing to fight for their series, convince whoever that they needed the extra time to be able to tell their story properly. It was already kind of rare to get more than 12 or 13 episodes to a season in 2012. Not only does Hyouka have 22, it doesn't have a set episode length either. Some episodes were 25 minutes long, sometimes they'd be as long as 28. That may not sound like a lot, but those extra 3 minutes can really make a difference when you're wrapping up a mystery. Hyouka maintains a pretty laid-back pace, but there's a ton of detail stuffed into each mystery, and it adheres to the only rule of detective fiction that I really care about, that your audience should have a fair shot at solving the mystery before it's revealed. The answer shouldn't hinge on some never-before-mentioned detail that the detective character reveals at the last minute. It may seem like a really innocuous detail when it first comes up, but that's the test. Anytime I didn't figure it out for myself, it was never accompanied by the feeling that I couldn't have figured it out for myself. That makes a difference. The Classic Literature Club doesn't actually study much literature, but there's something really fitting about that being their backdrop. I lost track of how many times a big development in a case hinged on some intricacy of the Japanese language, some word that could be read multiple ways or the like. My original college plans had been to study linguistics, so I love that sort of thing, but it would make me a little hesitant to suggest this one to a new anime fan, who may not know much about the culture or the language yet. But that was the only thing I enjoyed about this series that felt conditional in any way. Hyouka was a really beautiful show. The animation is clean, the colors are vibrant, there's some great musical tracks in the background. But I definitely felt like there was a great mind behind this series before we even got into the introduction mystery. Hyouka does some really cool things visually. Just the way they chose to present certain scenes. The very first time Hotaro feels himself getting sucked in by Eru's curiosity, he's struck by this vision of her hair growing out and wrapping around him, trapping him in place. It's kind of an eerie sequence. That image of a woman with long dark hair coming to life like that is a staple of Japanese horror, actually, but it gets the message across, and the horrifying thing about it is really relative to Hotaro's mindset. His realization that this girl is so innocent and earnest. He knows he's not going to be able to resist her asking for his help. A few episodes later, the club sits down with the school librarian, and she tells them the tale of an incident that occurred when she was a student here. But as she's talking, we see her younger self running through her mind, peeking in at the memories her present-day self is recounting. That scene could have just been the 5 of them sitting around a table, flipping through a photo album or something. I really loved seeing them go that extra step to bring it to life. At least every couple of episodes there'd be a scene like that, where the creativity really stood out to me. Sometimes that says as much about the writing as the actual plot does. On that note, I do want to talk about a couple major story points, but mostly in regards to how the series is structured. I said I'd warn you ahead of time if there would be spoilers, but I'm going to do this while keeping the specifics vague. Early on, Hotaro wants to know what made Eru want to join a dying club, and she's pretty cagey about it at first, saying only that she has personal reasons for being here. But Eru can't let go of a mystery, and Hotaro proves to be something of a natural detective once he resigns himself to it, so she confides in him her true motives. When Eru was a kid, her curiosity was encouraged by her favorite uncle, Jun. Though he never graduated, he was a student here in his time and a member of the Classic Lit Club. But Eru only knows this because she found the anthology his club compiled for one of the cultural festivals. She remembers her uncle's normally cheerful demeanor changing completely when she asked him about it. It was the only time he'd ever refused to answer her questions. She can't quite recall what exactly he said to her that day, just that it left her so upset that it brought her mother running in, while her beloved uncle made no attempt to comfort her. Not long after that, Jun disappeared. In the present day, he's been missing long enough to be declared legally dead, so Eru's determined to discover the truth behind the incident that got him expelled before his funeral, so she can feel that she's properly putting his memory to rest. This is the show's first big mystery, the one that brings these four together as a group. And I'm kinda disappointed to say that I think it's the best mystery in the whole series. There are some good twists. The sappy side of me loved seeing the bonds starting to grow between the kids, and it's got an emotional element a lot of the later story arcs are lacking, just because Eru has such a personal connection to it. Typically, you want a story to keep building until the end, so that the last storyline is the most impressive one. It's not a flaw that doomed my overall opinion of the show or anything. Don't get me wrong, all of the mysteries were interesting. It was just a little bit of a letdown that they weren't as consistently moving, emotionally, as the first arc that set my expectations for this show. The incident that got June expelled centered around that year's culture festival. I really think the kids could have bonded over coming together to solve just about any mystery, so I would have pushed this one back a bit. Maybe have Eru open up about halfway through the series, and then end it with the storyline that takes place during their own culture festival, which, mystery aside, was also the coolest school festival I've ever seen depicted in anime. There was just a sense of everything coming full circle that would have been really fitting for a conclusion. But before I talk a bit about its actual conclusion, I have to get a little deeper into the characters. Hyouka had a great cast of characters. There's a depth to all of these kids that made them feel very real to me. When they were first introduced, I kind of reflexively, mentally sorted them each into familiar character trope boxes. But it didn't take long for them all to outgrow those boxes. None of the four have one-note personalities. No one existed just to be the comic relief. They often reacted in ways I wasn't expecting, but that just reinforced that feeling that they all could be real people. Mayaka was the one most in danger of potentially being annoying, but they never dramatized those traits too far. She's the one who keeps everyone else on track, the one likely to lecture you for not getting your work done. But she's equally hard on herself, and that makes it a little more admirable. I'm sure everyone can think of an anime girl who seems to exist just to constantly snap at her friends or teammates for their mistakes, and Mayaka's really not like that. And this particular trait isn't really ever used for comedic effect. I was trying to be a little more articulate, but to put it simply, she's not this raging bitch that the others are constantly on edge around. There was a pleasant sort of softness to all her friendships. As hard as she is on Hotaro, she clearly cares about him too. She and Eru get along immediately. She has a surprisingly easy friendship with Satoshi. Her crush is established and present, but there's nothing over the top about it. No awkward interactions just to bring out a jealous side in her. I'll get into this a bit more when I talk about Satoshi, but it comes up near the end that she formally announced her feelings last year. But Satoshi's going through some personal stuff of his own and told her that he needed some time to figure that out, and she has backed off and tried to be patient in the meantime, which makes it equally satisfying that their friendship really doesn't seem to have suffered at all for this bump in the road. This series treats its characters and their relationship drama with a respect that I'm not sure I've ever seen in any other fiction, and I can't understate how refreshing that was to me. I really liked Mayaka, though I do feel she's the only one who doesn't really have a clear development arc. Like, she has insecurities, but the other three all have things they're actively trying to change about themselves. I mentioned Eru was a little more reserved than I'd expected, very polite and honest to a fault. Being born into such an important family comes with a lot of pressure, and she's got one half of it down. She's an expert at being the well-behaved daughter, and politeness can go a long way, but she is going to inherit a business one day, and being so nice also makes her the type of person people tend to steamroll over. So she tries to take lessons from one of her bolder friends about being more persuasive. How to make people pay attention to you. As a side note, there are a lot of recurring minor characters who I felt really helped bring this world and this school to life. They don't exist just for their own mysteries. The friendships the kids build in one arc are still present in later ones, and they can and do regularly call on those connections for help, which was cool to see. In the case of this particular friend, Eru returns to her and apologizes that she's just not cut out for the kind of manipulation tactics Fuyumi was trying to teach her. which I think anyone could have seen coming. But Eru's background had a really interesting effect on her character. I feel like another character with her personality would probably come across as naive, but her awareness of her responsibilities as the only child of the Chitanda family kept her feeling grounded. Once Eru and Hotaro start developing feelings for each other also, it's this constant undercurrent in their relationship. It's never played up to be a dramatic Romeo and Juliet sort of thing, but I could definitely feel it in her hesitance to confess or move that relationship forward in any way. Some of it may have been regular old shyness, but there's no doubt in my mind she was also very aware that asking someone from an ordinary family to get involved with her would be giving them a lot of extra responsibilities too, a commitment that someone like Hotaro especially might not feel is worth the trouble. I initially thought I'd be saving the main character for last, but I actually found Satoshi to be the most interesting of the group, and you can't really talk about him without getting into his best friend first, so let's talk about Hotaro. Some of the boys' early conversations were what first clued me in that the way this series handled its characters was going to be something special. Hotaro would have been perfectly content to sleep away his high school years, but it clearly moves him a bit when Satoshi gets serious about impressing his own potential upon him. He's not pushing Hotaro to change, but he does make it very clear that he wants better for his best friend, and when that kind of talk is coming from someone you care about, someone who's not normally that serious, it makes an impact. As the series goes on, and he starts hearing from more and more people that he has a natural talent for detective work, that the connections he sees aren't just luck like he'd been insisting, he starts to take it to heart, until finally, the same girl who attempts to coach Eru through being more persuasive manages to get under his skin a bit. She's basically hired the club to help solve a mystery going on with her class's festival project, but they've all been struggling to get Hotaro invested. She invites him out for tea one afternoon, and they have a really interesting conversation about the responsibility that accompanies skill or talent. She had one line that really stuck with me. Everyone ought to recognize what they are, otherwise it makes fools of those watching them. She basically shames him for not acknowledging his own gifts when others try twice as hard to get to his level yet still fail. And honestly, I don't think I would have judged him for being resistant to this line of thinking, that being talented means you owe the world something. But Hotaro's pretty swayed by this talk. I think some of it has to do with similar talks he'd been having with Satoshi, but he throws himself back into the case with renewed motivation, and takes it pretty hard when he then falls into the trap Fuyumi had been laying all along. This one was a multi-layered case. The real mystery ends up being something lying underneath the one that had actually been presented to them, but he does end up overlooking some things in the primary case once he's taken on this pressure to prove himself. It actually gave us a couple of great friendship moments. All three other members of the club pull him aside to express their doubts privately, not wanting to contradict him in public after he's already formally summarized everything for the class. Whatever rivalries may have been going on behind the scenes, they all still cared enough to prioritize not hurting his feelings first, and that was really sweet to me. But there were two sides to seeing Hotaro put himself out there like that. On one hand, I loved to see it. It showed a potential for growth I hadn't known whether I should dare to hope for at the start of the series. It was pretty emotional to see him so upset about getting it wrong, whereas it might have just been a mild annoyance to him if it had happened during an earlier case when he wasn't as invested. But on the other hand, this arc is only about the halfway point of the series, and it definitely leaves him a little changed. He doesn't totally revert back to his original mindset, but this potential for growth is also never really picked back up, and there's just something a little unsatisfying about a main protagonist whose personal journey drops off mid-tale. Which finally brings us to Satoshi, who may have been the most complex character in the club, despite originally being introduced as the sidekick, best friend sort of character. Hotaro likes to describe himself as living a gray life. In contrast, Satoshi says he prefers to live a shocking pink sort of existence. He's one of those characters who's just immediately likable. High energy, enthusiastic, involved in absolutely everything, including 2 other clubs, Satoshi likes to describe himself as a database. He has encyclopedic knowledge of just about everything having to do with the school, but he tends to remind them that a database can't draw conclusions, it can only provide the information. He doesn't have Hotaro's gift for bringing that information together, but every once in a while you'll see a flicker of a shadow cross Satoshi's face when he's discussing this with Hotaro, a silent suggestion that maybe he's not as satisfied with his role as he first appears. Satoshi's really a jack-of-all-trades in the master-of-none sense. He has a lot of interests, but doesn't feel like he could ever truly excel at any of them the way his best friend solves puzzles so naturally. This was an interesting show to bring up the question of natural genius versus hard work. That sort of storyline isn't rare in anime, but it usually comes up in action or sports series, genres that tend to favor the underdog, and thus send the message that of course you can catch up if you just work hard enough. That's really not the message Hyouka sends, as Satoshi continues to fail the little challenges he sets for himself, and gets increasingly down about it. I don't think this show is quite long enough to really make a statement on that issue as a whole, but we do get a decent exploration of Satoshi's character in one of the final episodes. I really think it's one of the best moments in the show, when he talks about how he was destroying himself with his own insecurities, how he constantly compared his achievements to others' success and was always left feeling lesser. He has a line that sums it up perfectly, why he could never be satisfied even when he did come out on top. If you don't have any fun winning, what's the point? Satoshi decided he didn't want to live like that anymore, so he did his best to throw away his ambition. He takes up any hobby that catches his interest, but doesn't let himself get too invested in any one thing. The wrench in that lifestyle is Mayaka, because he does like her back, but that's hardly an attitude he can take into a relationship. He knows that if he's going to formally accept her feelings, he has to be in a place where he can give all of himself to that venture, which is such an adult level of maturity in a teenager. I know people twice Satoshi's age who aren't that self-aware, and I don't say that to imply that it made him less realistic. I thought it was really great. The mystery plotlines were good, but it was the characters who really made this show special for me. I think they're all likable and at least a little relatable as individuals, but they also have great chemistry as a group from the start too. The animation was beautiful in an in-your-face kind of way. The character writing was equally beautiful, but in a subtler way. I feel like I have to compare it to Nisekoi, just a little, because most of my review for its second season revolved around what a letdown it was that it felt so incomplete. Hyouka is a series whose anime also leaves the story incomplete, but some series can get away with that. Nisekoi really revolves around one central mystery that remains unanswered. There are a lot of mysteries in Hyouka, but it's the characters and their personal growth that carries the story. And so, though I would have liked to spend more time with these characters and definitely would have watched a second season, it doesn't feel like a horrible offense this time around to end it prematurely. The anime really is just a slice of their lives. The manga is actually still ongoing, and I might look into it someday, but I am satisfied by what we got. It does feel like they might have expected to get a continuation. At least, as I already mentioned, if I'd been putting this series together for an adaptation where I knew my time was limited, I would have structured it a little differently. I think their cultural festival would have been a really fitting ending. The little story it actually ends on is cute, but a little fillery. But I'd definitely recommend Hyouka to an anime fan looking for a lighthearted detective story. There's a depth to these characters that you don't get in every series, and some really beautiful visual storytelling. Thank you all again for voting it in. I'm glad I can finally say I've seen it. Thank you for watching.